I've solved it, see?
Let me see, dear.
Whoa, that's complicated.
Is it right?
The afternoon light cast golden patterns across Professor David Chen's cluttered office at Stanford University's Department of Historical Archives. He adjusted his reading glasses for the 100th time that morning, peering at the digital scan of a photograph that had been consuming his thoughts for 6 weeks. The image showed an ordinary American family from 1947. 5 people arranged in a typical post-war portrait outside a modest suburban home in Pasadena, California. A father in a crisp white shirt and dark trousers stood beside his wife in a floral print dress. Their 3 children ranged in age from perhaps 8 to 15, all dressed in their Sunday best. At first glance, nothing seemed unusual about the Henderson family portrait. But something about the middle child, a boy of about 12, had captured David's attention the moment he discovered the photograph in a donation box from the estate of Margaret Henderson Walsh. The boy's eyes held an intensity that seemed to burn through the decades. They weren't just looking at the camera. They appeared to be staring directly into the future, into David's own eyes, with an expression that combined profound intelligence with barely contained urgency. David had cataloged thousands of historical photographs during his career, but he had never seen a child's gaze quite like this one. More puzzling was what the boy held in his hands. At first, it appeared to be a simple notebook or journal, clutched against his chest like a shield. But when David enhanced the image using the university's advanced digital restoration software, he noticed something extraordinary. The notebook's cover showed mathematical equations, incredibly complex formulas that seemed far beyond what any 12-year-old should comprehend. David picked up his phone and dialed his colleague, Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a mathematician specializing in the history of scientific development. "Sarah, I need you to look at something. I'm sending you an enhanced image of a photograph from 1947. Tell me what you see on that notebook." 20 minutes later, Sarah burst into his office, her laptop under her arm and her face flushed with excitement. "David, where did you get this photograph? Those equations on that notebook, they're not simple arithmetic. That's advanced quantum mechanics, specifically related to quantum entanglement. The mathematics shown there wasn't even publicly theorized until the late 1950s, and it wasn't properly formulated until the 1970s. David felt his pulse quicken. "Are you saying those equations couldn't have existed in 1947? Sarah zoomed in on her screen. "I'm saying these specific formulations, this particular way of expressing quantum correlation, it predates public scientific knowledge by at least a decade, possibly 2. Either this is an elaborate hoax, or that child was working on mathematics that wouldn't be discovered for years." David spread the contents of Margaret Henderson Walsh's donation across his office floor. Birth certificates, school reports, newspaper clippings, and dozens of photographs created a mosaic of the Henderson family's life in post-war California. The middle child was identified as Thomas Henderson, born February 14, 1935, in Pasadena. David found Thomas's elementary school records from Longfellow Elementary School. The file was remarkable. First grade teacher's note: Thomas shows unusual aptitude for numbers, completes arithmetic assignments before other children finish reading instructions. Recommend advancement. Third grade teacher's note: Thomas has begun correcting my mathematics on the chalkboard, politely but persistently. I have verified his corrections. He is always right. I do not know how to teach a child who already knows everything I can offer. Fifth grade teacher's note: Thomas no longer participates in class. He sits quietly working in notebooks filled with symbols I cannot understand. His test scores remain perfect, but I worry about his social development. He has no friends. Other children call him strange. David found a letter dated November 1946 from the principal to Thomas's parents. "Your son's intellectual capabilities far exceed our school's resources. We have consulted with professors at Caltech who have reviewed Thomas's work. They describe it as graduate-level theoretical physics. We strongly recommend you contact the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton. They may be equipped to nurture his extraordinary gifts." David sat back, stunned. The Institute for Advanced Study, that was where Einstein worked, where the greatest minds in physics gathered. They had recommended an 11-year-old child? He searched through more documents and found newspaper clippings from the Pasadena Star-News. March 1947, local boy genius astounds Caltech professors. The article featured a photograph of young Thomas standing beside Dr. Richard Feynman, who would later win the Nobel Prize in Physics. Young Thomas Henderson has been invited to attend special Saturday sessions at the California Institute of Technology. The article read, Dr. Feynman stated that the boy demonstrates intuitive understanding of quantum mechanics that rivals advanced graduate students. When asked how he developed such knowledge, Thomas reportedly said, "I just see how numbers work together, how they describe the way things really are." David found more clippings documenting Thomas's brief moment of public attention. April 1947, child prodigy to begin special study program. May 1947, young genius struggles with public attention. This article showed a different tone. Thomas Henderson, the 12-year-old mathematical prodigy, has withdrawn from public appearances. His parents released a statement requesting privacy, noting that the attention has been overwhelming for their son. Dr. Raymond Mitchell of Caltech's physics department confirmed that Thomas has discontinued his Saturday sessions, stating, "The boy's gifts are undeniable, but he is still a child. The pressure of expectation may have become too much." Then the clippings stopped. David searched through the remaining months of 1947 and all of 1948. Nothing. The Henderson family had vanished from public record. David found a handwritten letter dated June 1947 from Dorothy Henderson, Thomas's mother, to her sister in Ohio. "Thomas isn't sleeping anymore. He sits at his desk all night covering paper with equations. Yesterday I found him crying, saying the numbers won't stop, that he sees them everywhere, in the trees, in the clouds, in his own reflection. The doctors say it's nervous exhaustion from all the attention, but I think it's something deeper. My son is drowning in his own mind, and I don't know how to save him." David drove to Pasadena on a crisp October morning. The Henderson house still stood on a quiet street lined with jacaranda trees. The current owner, an elderly woman named Mrs. Patricia Flores, invited him inside when he explained his research. "Oh yes, the Henderson family," she said, settling into her living room chair. "I bought this house from them in 1952. They were in a hurry to sell, moving to somewhere remote, I think. The father, William, he seemed worn down, exhausted. The mother barely spoke. I remember the children, though. The oldest boy was normal enough, and the little girl was shy but sweet. But the middle boy, Thomas, I'll never forget him." David leaned forward. "Why is that?" Mrs. Flores gazed out the window at the autumn light. He looked at everything like he was solving a puzzle. "When I walked through the house during the viewing, he followed me around, and at one point he said, 'You're going to be very happy here for exactly 37 years. Then you'll move to be closer to your daughter in San Diego.' I laughed it off. What child talks like that? But David, I moved to San Diego in 1989, exactly 37 years after buying this house, to be near my daughter." David felt chills run down his spine. "Mrs. Flores, do you have any idea where the Henderson family went?" She shook her head. "I asked the real estate agent once out of curiosity. He said they'd moved to some small town in Oregon or Washington, somewhere isolated. The father had taken a job as a bookkeeper in a lumber mill, quite a step down from his position at an aerospace company here. It seemed like they were running away from something." David spent the next week searching through property records in Oregon and Washington. He finally found a deed transfer in a town called Millbrook, Oregon, population 1,200. William Henderson had purchased a small farmhouse outside town in July 1952. David booked a flight to Portland and drove 3 hours into the mountains. Millbrook was the kind of town that time seemed to have forgotten: one main street, a general store, a post office, and a diner. David checked into the only motel and headed to the town's tiny historical society. The volunteer, a man in his 70s named Frank Cooper, brightened when David mentioned the Henderson family. "The Hendersons, sure, I remember them. I was just a kid when they arrived in 1952, but everyone in town talked about them. The middle boy, Thomas, he was different." David pulled out his notebook. "Different how?" Frank settled into his chair, clearly enjoying having an audience. "Thomas never went to school. His parents said they were homeschooling him, which was unusual back then, but legal. You'd see him sometimes in town with his mother, always carrying those notebooks, always watching everything with those intense eyes. The other kids tried to talk to him a few times, but he didn't know how to play, didn't understand normal kid things. I remember once, must have been 1953, there was a bad fire at the lumber mill. Thomas was in town with his mother when the alarm went out. He told the fire chief exactly where the fire had started, what was feeding it, and how to contain it. He was right on every detail. The fire chief asked him how he knew, and Thomas said he calculated the probabilities based on wind direction, building materials, and heat distribution. He was 13 years old. Frank continued, his family kept to themselves mostly, but there were stories. People said Thomas could predict weather with perfect accuracy, that he once told Doc Morrison that Mrs. Chun would have complications during childbirth and exactly what the doctor would need to do. He was right. Some folks thought he was blessed. Others thought he was cursed or maybe dangerous. In 1956, something happened. I don't know the details. The family packed up in the middle of the night and left. Just disappeared. The house stood empty for years. David drove to the old Henderson property. The farmhouse was long abandoned, windows broken, roof sagging. He carefully entered, mindful of rotting floorboards. The house had been stripped of furniture, but in what must have been Thomas's room, David found something extraordinary. The walls were covered in writing, floor to ceiling, every inch filled with mathematical equations, diagrams, and notes written in tiny, precise handwriting. David photographed everything, his hands shaking. This wasn't the work of a disturbed mind. This was sophisticated theoretical physics, mathematics that looked decades ahead of its time. In one corner, written larger than the rest, I can see it all, every possibility, every outcome, every connection. The universe is just mathematics, and I can read it like a book, but knowing everything means belonging nowhere. I am so alone. David sent the photographs to Sarah Mitchell and a theoretical physicist at MIT. Both called him within hours, voices filled with astonishment. David, Sarah said, some of these equations relate to string theory, which wasn't even proposed until the 1960s. Some of this looks like formulations related to the Higgs boson, which wasn't discovered until 2012. Either Thomas Henderson was the greatest mind in physics history, or something impossible was happening. David returned to Stanford and dove into census records, death certificates, any trace of the Henderson family after 1956. He found a death certificate for William Henderson in Seattle in 1962. Cause of death, heart attack. Dorothy Henderson had died in 1968 in a nursing home in Tacoma. The older brother, Robert, had become an accountant, lived a normal life, died in 2003. The younger sister, Mary, had married, raised children, died in 1995. But Thomas, there was nothing, no death certificate, no marriage license, no employment records. Thomas Henderson had vanished completely in 1956 at age 21. David was about to give up when he received a call from an archivist at the Library of Congress. Dr. Chun, you have a standing search for any documents related to Thomas Henderson, correct? We found something unusual. The manuscript division received a donation in 1985, a collection of notebooks from an anonymous donor. The notebooks contain advanced mathematical and physical theories, some of which have only recently been validated. The donor's note said these belonged to someone who saw too much, too soon. We never knew who wrote them, but based on your description, I compared the handwriting. It matches. David traveled to Washington, D.C. the next morning. The librarian led him to a temperature-controlled vault and presented 12 leather-bound notebooks. David opened the first one with gloved hands. The first page read, "My name is Thomas Henderson. I was born February 14, 1935. By the age of 6, I understood that I was different. I saw patterns in everything, mathematical relationships that governed reality itself. I thought it was normal until I realized others couldn't see what I saw. By 8, I had developed formulations for quantum mechanics that wouldn't be discovered for decades. By 10, I understood the fundamental forces of the universe in ways that physics wouldn't confirm until the 21st century." David read through the night. Thomas's notebooks chronicled his entire life. The excitement of early childhood when he thought everyone saw the world through mathematical patterns. The confusion when he realized his difference. The brief hope when Caltech professors recognized his genius. Then the crushing weight when he understood what his gift truly meant. The notebook from 1947 was heartbreaking. They want me to be a prodigy, a genius child to parade around. But I'm not a genius. I'm cursed. I see too much. When I look at a person, I calculate the probability of their death, the exact percentage of diseases they might develop, the mathematical likelihood of their happiness or suffering. When I look at the sky, I see atmospheric conditions extrapolated forward, predicting weather months in advance. When I look at the stock market reports, I see patterns that predict economic collapse years before it happens. I told my mother yesterday that her friend Mrs. Wilson would die in a car accident within 3 weeks. I calculated it based on her driving patterns, the mechanical condition of her car, and traffic accident probabilities. I wanted to warn her. My mother told me never to speak such things again. Mrs. Wilson died 2 weeks later, exactly as I predicted. Now my mother looks at me with fear. Thomas wrote about the decision to leave Pasadena. I overheard my parents talking late at night. My father said I was scaring people, that my predictions were becoming dangerous. I had told the aerospace engineer 3 doors down that his current project would fail catastrophically, resulting in deaths. I gave him the exact mathematical reasons. 2 months later, a rocket exploded on the launch pad, killing 6 people, exactly as I had calculated. The engineer told my father I was either a prophet or a demon. We left soon after. The notebooks from the Millbrook years showed Thomas struggling to find purpose. I've stopped trying to connect with people. I've stopped trying to explain what I see. I spend my days calculating, trying to find some pattern that might explain why I exist, why I was given this ability. I've begun working on problems that won't be relevant for decades, proving theorems that future mathematicians will need. I write them down, hoping that someday someone will find them useful. But what is the point of seeing the future if you cannot share it, cannot change it, cannot belong to the present? In 1955, Thomas wrote about an incident that would force his final disappearance. A young woman in Millbrook, Sarah Winters, had befriended him. She was the first person who didn't fear his difference, who found his unique perspective fascinating rather than frightening. Thomas had fallen in love with her, the first normal human connection he had experienced in years. But Thomas's gift made the relationship impossible. I calculated our probabilities, he wrote. If Sarah stays with me, her life expectancy decreases by 43%. The stress of being connected to someone like me, the isolation it would bring her, the fear others would direct at her. The mathematics are clear. Loving me will destroy her life. I also calculated her future without me. She will meet someone else within 8 months. She will be happy. She will live a long, full life. The only way to save her is to leave. The final entry in Millbrook was dated March 15, 1956. I am leaving tonight. I've told my family I need to disappear completely. My father cried. My mother held me and whispered that she was sorry. Sorry she couldn't protect me. Sorry the world couldn't understand me. My sister Mary said I was the bravest person she knew. I don't feel brave. I feel tired. I'm 21 years old, and I've never belonged anywhere. I see a future where my family is safe, where Sarah is happy, where I exist on the margins, solving problems for a world that won't know I exist for decades. Maybe that's my purpose. David turned to the subsequent notebooks, covering 1956 through 1984. Thomas had essentially become a ghost, moving from town to town, taking odd jobs, living in cheap rooms, spending every spare moment filling notebooks with advanced mathematics and physics. The entries showed a man in constant internal struggle, brilliant beyond measure but desperately lonely. In 1962, Thomas wrote about his father's death. I calculated the exact day my father would die 3 years ago. I knew the date, the time, the cause. I considered warning him, but I've learned that knowledge of the future doesn't change it. It only adds suffering. I wasn't at his funeral. I couldn't face my family, couldn't bear to see my mother's grief while knowing the exact date she would die as well. I am a coward. In 1968, he wrote about his mother's passing. I sat outside the nursing home the night she died. I couldn't go inside, but I wanted to be close. I calculated that she spent the last 3 years of her life wondering where I was, if I was safe, if I hated her for not being able to help me. The mathematics of emotional pain are the most brutal equations I know. The notebooks revealed that Thomas had been anonymously submitting mathematical proofs and theoretical physics papers to academic journals since the early 1960s. Using various pseudonyms, David cross-referenced the dates and topics. At least 15 major breakthroughs in theoretical physics between 1960 and 1984 could be traced back to anonymously submitted papers that matched Thomas's handwriting and mathematical style. A paper on quantum entanglement published under the name T.H. Winters in 1964 had revolutionized the field. A proof related to dimensional mathematics submitted anonymously to Princeton in 1971 had opened entire new areas of research. Thomas Henderson had been advancing human knowledge for decades while living in complete isolation. In 1976, Thomas wrote, "I've begun to understand my purpose. I cannot live in the present, I don't belong there, but I can gift the future. I can leave behind the mathematics that humanity will need. Every equation I solve, every proof I complete, is a message in a bottle thrown forward in time. Perhaps that's enough." The later notebooks showed Thomas moving through the American West, working as a janitor, a night clerk, a warehouse worker, always jobs that required minimal interaction. He lived in boarding houses and cheap motels, spending every free moment on his work. In 1982, he wrote his most personal entry in years. "I am 47 years old. I've lived my entire adult life alone. I've never had a real conversation. I've never been touched with affection. I've never shared a meal with someone who knew my real name. I've calculated that I will live to be 73 years old, 26 more years of this half-life. The mathematics that make up the universe are beautiful, but they are cold comfort." The final notebook was dated 1984. Thomas was 49. "I am dying faster than I calculated. I've developed a condition that I didn't account for in my probabilities. Perhaps even I cannot see everything. I am donating these notebooks to the Library of Congress with the instruction that they remain sealed until 2010, 26 years from now. By then, physics will have advanced enough that these equations will be understandable, verifiable, useful. I include no name, no identification. I want the work to stand on its own merit, not be colored by the tragic story of the person who created it. To whoever finds these and reads my story, I want you to know that I don't regret my mind. I regret only that the world couldn't make space for someone like me. I saw too much too soon, and that made me impossible. But my work will matter. The mathematics will outlive me and outlive the loneliness. That has to be enough." The notebook ended there. David sat in the Library of Congress vault, tears streaming down his face. He spent the next week searching for any trace of Thomas Henderson's death. Finally, he found it, a death certificate in a small town in Nevada, dated November 3, 1984. Thomas Michael Henderson, age 49, cause of death, heart failure. He had died alone in a motel room. The motel owner had found him 2 days later, and he was buried in the town's potter's field, a grave for unknown or unclaimed people. David contacted Sarah Mitchell, the theoretical physicists at MIT, and several historians of science. Together, they began the process of analyzing Thomas's notebooks, cross-referencing them with developments in physics over the past 70 years. The findings were staggering. Thomas Henderson had independently developed theories and mathematical frameworks that took the collective scientific community decades to discover. String theory, quantum entanglement, the mathematical basis for the Higgs field, aspects of dark matter and dark energy, even preliminary frameworks for unifying quantum mechanics and general relativity. All of it was in his notebooks, worked out years or decades before the scientific community reached the same conclusions. Dr. Elizabeth Warren, a physicist from MIT, was brought to tears reading Thomas's work. This man was seeing the fundamental structure of reality with clarity that we're only now beginning to achieve with billion-dollar particle accelerators and international collaborations. He did it alone, with paper and pencil, guided purely by the mathematical beauty of the universe. He may have been the most brilliant mind in human history, and he died unknown, alone, buried in an unmarked grave. David organized an expedition to Nevada to find Thomas's grave. The potter's field was overgrown, records barely maintained. It took 2 days of searching with ground-penetrating radar to locate the burial site. A simple concrete marker, number 247, no name, no date. David arranged for a proper gravestone. Thomas Michael Henderson, 1935 to 1984, who saw the universe in mathematics and gifted his vision to the future. The stone was installed on a bright April morning. David stood before it with Sarah, Dr. Warren, and several other scientists whose work had been built unknowingly on Thomas's foundations. Sarah read from one of Thomas's notebooks, "The universe is mathematics made manifest. Every particle, every force, every moment of time is an equation solving itself. I was given the ability to see these equations clearly, to read the language in which reality is written. It was a gift and a curse, beauty and isolation. If these notebooks survive me, I hope they serve humanity's understanding. I hope the loneliness was worth something." Dr. Warren spoke next. Thomas, you were right. The loneliness was worth something. Your work has advanced human knowledge by decades. Theories that bore other people's names were built on foundations you laid. The mathematics you developed in isolation are now used by thousands of scientists around the world. You changed the future, even though you couldn't live in the present. David returned to Stanford and worked with the university to organize a symposium on Thomas Henderson's life and work. The event drew physicists, mathematicians, and historians from around the world. David's presentation focused on the human story, on the tragedy of a mind so advanced that it became a prison. He showed the 1947 family photograph, the young boy with those intense eyes, clutching his notebook filled with impossible mathematics. "This is Thomas Henderson at 12 years old," David said to the packed auditorium. In his hands, he holds equations that wouldn't be discovered for decades. Behind those eyes is a mind that can see patterns in reality that the rest of us are blind to. But look closely at his expression. That's not the face of a happy child prodigy. That's the face of someone who already understands he will never belong. The symposium published a comprehensive volume on Thomas's work, including facsimiles of his notebooks, analysis of his contributions to physics, and the story of his life. The book, titled The Boy Who Saw Tomorrow, The Life and Mathematics of Thomas Henderson, became a sensation in scientific communities and beyond. Major news outlets picked up the story. The New York Times ran a feature, The Unknown Genius Who Changed Physics. The Atlantic published a long-form piece, The Loneliest Mind in History. Documentary filmmakers approached David about telling Thomas's story. But for David, the most important moment came when he received a call from a woman named Jennifer Martinez. "Dr. Chun, I saw the article about Thomas Henderson. I think I met him. My name was Jennifer Winters before I married. My grandmother was Sarah Winters, from Millbrook, Oregon." David's heart raced. "Your grandmother knew Thomas?" "Yes. She died 10 years ago, but before she passed, she told me about a young man she knew briefly in the 1950s. She said he was the most remarkable person she ever met, that he could see things others couldn't, that he disappeared to protect her. I never understood what she meant until I read your article." Jennifer told David that Sarah had kept a letter Thomas had written to her before he disappeared. Sarah had read it only once, then sealed it away, unable to bear rereading it. After Sarah's death, Jennifer had found it among her grandmother's possessions. "I'll send you a copy," Jennifer said. David received the letter 2 days later. It was dated March 14, 1956, written the day before Thomas left Millbrook. "Dear Sarah, by the time you read this, I will be gone. I need you to understand that leaving has nothing to do with how I feel about you. You are the only person who ever made me feel human, who saw past the strangeness to something worth knowing. You gave me hope that I might belong somewhere." The letter continued, revealing Thomas's calculations about Sarah's future. "But I can see outcomes, probabilities, the mathematical consequences of choices. I've calculated what happens if I stay, if you and I continue down this path. The mathematics are clear. Staying will damage your life in ways I cannot accept. You will be isolated because of me, feared because of your association with me, diminished because people will never see you as separate from the strange Henderson boy. I've also calculated your future without me. In 8 months, you will meet a man named Robert Martinez. He is good and kind, and he will make you happy. You will marry him, have 3 children, live a long and full life surrounded by love. The mathematics show me that my absence gives you a 94% probability of happiness. My presence reduces that to 41%. I love you enough to choose your happiness over my own. Please don't search for me. Please live the beautiful life that the mathematics promise you. Thank you for making me feel less alone, even briefly. With love, Thomas." David sat in his office, holding the copy of the letter, tears blurring his vision. Sarah had indeed married Robert Martinez in 1957. She had 3 children and lived until age 83, surrounded by family. Thomas had predicted it all, then walked away to make it happen. David included the letter in a second edition of the book, published 1 year after the symposium. The new edition included testimonials from scientists whose work had been influenced by Thomas's anonymous contributions, letters from people who had briefly encountered him, and efforts to map his movements across 30 years of deliberate obscurity. Most significantly, David worked with the town of Millbrook to purchase the old Henderson property. The house where Thomas had covered the walls with equations was carefully dismantled and reconstructed at the Smithsonian Museum of American History. Visitors could walk through Thomas's room, see the walls filled with his handwriting, and understand the physical manifestation of his isolation and brilliance. The exhibition was titled Between Worlds: The Life of Thomas Henderson. The centerpiece was the enlarged 1947 family photograph, displayed alongside enhanced images showing the equations on Thomas's notebook. Interactive displays allowed visitors to explore the mathematics Thomas had developed and see how it connected to modern physics. Dr. Warren served as the scientific consultant, creating explanations that made Thomas's work accessible to general audiences. But the exhibition also emphasized the human tragedy. Panels displayed Thomas's own words about loneliness, isolation, and the burden of seeing too much. Visitors left not just in awe of his brilliance, but in sorrow for the life he couldn't live. David received letters from parents of gifted children, from people who felt isolated by their own abilities, from scientists who had struggled with the weight of their knowledge. Thomas's story resonated because it illuminated a profound truth. Sometimes the greatest gifts come with the greatest costs. The exhibition traveled to museums in 15 cities over 3 years. At each location, scientists gave talks about Thomas's contributions. Mental health professionals discussed the challenges faced by profoundly gifted individuals. Educators debated how society could better support children with extraordinary abilities. 5 years after David first discovered the photograph, he stood before Thomas's grave again. The potter's field had been transformed into a memorial garden. Visitors came regularly, leaving flowers, notes, mathematical equations written on paper. Someone had left a sign that read, "Thank you for seeing what we couldn't, for carrying the burden alone, for gifting us the future." David placed his own offering, a copy of the book, waterproofed and sealed. "Thomas, your story is known now. You're not forgotten. You're not alone anymore, even in death." The mathematical community has established the Henderson Prize, awarded annually to young theorists whose work shows extraordinary vision. Your name is spoken in lecture halls and laboratories around the world. The photograph that started this journey, the image of a 12-year-old boy with those intense eyes, has been reproduced in textbooks and articles, symbolizing the mystery of genius and the tragedy of isolation. David's final act was to work with theoretical physicists to continue analyzing Thomas's notebooks. Even decades after his death, Thomas's work yielded new insights. In 2023, Dr. Warren published a paper demonstrating that equations Thomas had written in 1978 provided a framework for understanding quantum computing in ways that current researchers had missed. She titled the paper, "Henderson's Gift: Quantum Frameworks from a Forgotten Genius." "I think Thomas knew this would happen," she told David. "He understood that his work would keep contributing, keep advancing knowledge long after he was gone. He couldn't live in his own time, so he lived for the future. That was his choice, his sacrifice, and his triumph." The photograph of the Henderson family in 1947 would never be ordinary again. It was a portal into an extraordinary story, a reminder that genius can be both blessing and curse, that seeing too much can mean belonging nowhere, and that sometimes the greatest contributions come from the loneliest places. And at the center stood Thomas, a 12-year-old boy holding equations that described the future, eyes that saw everything except a place where he could belong.